This episode of Earl Grey is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
Hi, this is Robert O'Reilly. My name is Gowron. Honor to you and your house. You're listening to Trek FM.
T. Earl Grey hot.
Welcome, listeners, to another cup of Earl Grey, Trek FM's dedicated podcast to the next generation. I'm your host, Amy Nelson, and joined with me today are Richard Marquez and Justin Ozer. Richard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Getting over a chest cold, and no thanks to climbing Long's Peak, but yeah, I'm doing well.
Awesome. And Justin, yourself?
I'm doing well. Yeah, great to be here again. I know we had a jam-packed episode last week with all the Standard Orbit crew, and now that it's only three of us, it's like, oh.
I know,
three?
we have space here. It's not as crowded.
But of course, it's great to always be with you guys talking about the next generation.
It is. Well, we have some feedback from our listeners group on the Babel Conference, and this is for Earl Grey episode 226, The Lost Episodes, Part 1. That was a really fun beginning series that we're going to be doing, and it was, let's read Wes Huntington's comment. He says, I'm glad that I was way off on my prediction for Terminus. I actually looked it up after I made my prediction. Either would have been a great season 1 episode with some revisions because, let's face it, besides a few good strong episodes, Conspiracy comes to mind as a strong one, season 1 has aged really badly in terms of episode quality. Can't wait for more of these lost episodes. Side note, that episode you couldn't think of the name was Up the Long Ladder from season 2 with the clones on the planet Mariposa. Well, thank you, Wes, for listening and clearing up what we couldn't remember up the long ladder.
Though I am a little more fond of season 1 than I think Wes is.
Yes, I think we all are.
Chris Rabaka says, it is always cool to hear about lost episodes. I wish there were books like These Are the Voyages for the short ones. I love reading about the episodes that never made it, or a concept that got changed from a story idea to execution. Very much so. I wish there was books like that as well. I mean, it would be I would love to hear what the writers' thoughts were after the fact, after they made it, and see where the episode could have gone for them.
Yeah, there aren't books like that besides, I think, TOS and TNG, but there's some good information on Memory Alpha. They have an article dedicated to each show and movie, I think, showing what some of those kind of lost episodes or things that didn't make it are. So,
yeah, we'll keep on listening as we continue our series on lost episodes. So,
yeah, so Zach Moore said, Data's origin here lines up with his backstory on his Galoob action figure. And then he posted a picture, and on the back of the package, it has a picture of Data and it says, Origin, android fabricated by unknown aliens. So that definitely fits with what we heard about in the lost episodes where he was fabricated by some aliens, entities or something, and not a human like Noonien Sung. So very interesting that they had that information when they were making the toy.
Yeah, definitely. And Greg Malumbi says, I hope the more you guys get into this, the more we might see lost episodes in the later seasons. It was interesting hearing various ideas that did actually see the light of day, such as Worf's rite of ascension or things that led to the crystalline entity. I like the first story more than the second, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And definitely we'll be getting into later seasons. This is just the start. There's tons of these. So we're starting on season 1 and moving forward. May go back and forth, but there's going to be things for all the different seasons in some of the movies. So we'll get there.
Yeah. And we had some feedback on our mothers on TNG. That was Earl Grey episode 227. Richard, you want to start us off?
Sure. Pierre LaRocco said, "You can really tell how much Worf cares about his mother in the episode Homeworld, or Homeward, where his first reaction to his brother is, 'What would Mother think?' I think that that is so powerful that he cares about his mother to think of her first."
Yeah, it's a good point. It's something I definitely didn't think about because she doesn't appear in that episode, but she's mentioned.
She is.
So it's a great point. And then Patrick Carlin says, "Loved hearing how Amy got into Trek by watching it with her mom. It was the same for me. Some of my earliest memories from when I was no more than 3 or 4 are of watching TOS with her on our small black and white TV in the living room."
Yes, we love our mothers. And yes, I just have to agree. It brings back that nostalgia of, watching it originally with family members and, specifically like Patrick and myself with our mothers. So very nice memory. Well, today we are going to talk about the episode The Wounded. And this came about because we were talking about season 4 character moments. And we really brought up some amazing scenes from this episode and realized there's so much here to talk about. It definitely deserves its entire episode on its own. So that is what we're going to be doing today. First, we've got to the introduction to the Cardassians. And when you first heard the Federation had been in a long conflict with the Cardassians up until the year before The Wounded, and now they're allies, were you guys surprised about this?
Well, I think the first time that I saw that, and by that point I was seeing TNG a lot later, but I didn't know kind of how the Cardassians would be used. I thought it was just maybe something that week. So I honestly didn't think about it too much until later, although it is like there's been this really long drawn out conflict that just ended last year and you'd never heard of it before. I guess that can happen on something episodic, but I was a little bit surprised, but didn't think about it more until I rewatched after seeing how important the Cardassians become, and I was like, wait a minute, we should have seen more of that. So,
well, you also got to remember that when this episode aired, this was January 28th of 1991. This was right before Operation Desert Storm was just about to commence. And, we were having problems with Iraq at that time. And whatnot, based on Saddam Hussein's improper uses of chemical weapons. And I mean, it definitely foreshadows what was going on in the world at that time. And, it truly was a scary time because I had like almost 9 members of my family over there. So, definitely a scary time. I mean, and then to add, to put a twist like I honestly not even thinking about it back when I was a child, because I don't think I was really watching Star Trek at that moment, because the entire base was basically on lockdown, and we were like, oh, what's gonna happen? So definitely thinking about it in that time frame when I was a child, when this episode aired, it definitely brings a certain like nostalgia or scary nostalgia for this episode. That's for sure. Yeah,
that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that time period that it aired right after the Gulf War started, and I mean they had written it some months before, but that whole situation started the previous August. So while they were writing it, that was going on. So I wonder if that might have influenced them in some way. But that's tied to what you think about for that period. That's interesting.
Yeah, and this is an unusual episode where we have like the alien species is the Federation's ally and a human commanded Federation starship is the enemy. Like it just sort of flips it. I think that was pretty brilliant on the writer's part there. Like we don't see that normally, It's usually the aliens that are the bad guys, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Although as I was thinking about this, I was trying to think like where else in Star Trek have you seen something before this, quite like that. I mean, and there are times, I think, where someone's commanding a starship and they've gone a little crazy, like in the original series. There are a couple of places like that, but it's not like there's an alien species that you're working with that are your allies even after a long conflict, and this human starship is your enemy. So you get into this uncomfortable situation where Picard has to think about firing on another Federation ship, and someone I think he knows well, and is someone who has a lot of prestige. So it is really, I think that's one of the things that makes it a great episode, because it's flipping things a little bit and you don't quite know what to expect from it the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I like how we're introduced to 3 Cardassians, and it sort of gives us the spectrum of how people are going to think and behave, and with their actions. Like we get Gulmasset, and we have Glendaro and Glentilly. Glendaro is the Cardassian in 10 Forward, and the one in the turbo lift with, he seems to be very reasonable and sympathetic. He's trustworthy. He's reaching out, trying to build commonalities. And then we have Glentilla, who tries to get unauthorized access to the Enterprise computer. He's obviously untrustworthy and trying to get gain for Cardassia. And then we have Gulmasset, who seems, sometimes genuine for his concern for preserving the peace, but at other times he definitely wants the advantage for Cardassia. Like, we get this spectrum when these 3 characters, with how they are reacting to this peace treaty. And I think it really says a lot for, how people in society deal with unexpected or, these, now all of a sudden they're our allies.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. They chose these 3 characters, and they're kind of a spectrum. Sometimes I think you'll see that with alien species if they look more human, but the Cardassians look very different. They're very kind of reptilian or snake-like or something like that. But so they seem very different, but they were smart enough, I think, in this episode to say, like, not all Cardassians are bad or untrustworthy. There are some, like Darrow in particular, throughout the episode, he seems pretty reasonable, is tired of war, talks to O'Brien and is open to him. So that's great to see. And Masset's kind of somewhere in between, the guy who's trying to break into the computer and the guy who's totally sympathetic. Because at the end, that he knows that they're running weapons, but he's not going to let on about that until toward the end. But he does seem a little tired of the war too. So I think in the one episode, they have a pretty nuanced portrayal of the Cardassians.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up the look of the Cardassians, and as we lovingly call them, our spoonheads, right?
That's an insult to a Cardassian.
So we definitely get a very interesting look at the Cardassians and their ship. There's great scenes out there and the battle there, and I guess a little bit. But what do you think of the Cardassian look, their uniforms, and their ship?
Well, I think the look is very interesting, although from here until you see them later, it changes because they get a lot grayer. They're kind of a little, I don't know what color, kind of like whitish and reddish, brownish or something. So that changes a little bit. Their uniform changes a lot because they're wearing like this weird brown kind of padding and this like headgear that you never see again.
Thankfully.
Thankfully, yeah. I think, well, at a certain point, they just like take it off and you never really see it after that. But I think it's a really interesting look, and clearly they're alien. They're quite different. Their ships look different. I think you see a Gowler class here, which you see a lot later in Deep Space Nine, especially, and it has kind of such a different shape than a Federation ship, and I kind of like how it looks. So I think they were really taking some time and effort to differentiate themselves from the Federation and humans, especially. It wasn't just like, here's some humans that have some slightly different foreheads or some splotches, or they don't even look different, but you say they're alien. They're quite alien and quite different, and that really helps in the episode because they have been adversaries, and people are trying to kind of get over that a little bit. So I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, I like their I can't remember where it was. We discussed the Wounded briefly about I don't know, maybe a year ago. But I always joke that they were the Cleveland Browns of space, because I mean it's all brown. It looks like a football helmet minus missing
Yeah.
certain panels, and it looks like they're wearing some kind of plastic bag that's brown, or like you're like a reusable leather couch or something like that. There you go. That's what it looks like. It looks like a reused, repurposed leather couch on them,
Yeah.
and it's like that silver kind, after, or not silver kind, that glossy kind that you, after a while, it's been used and all that kind of stuff. That kind of feeling. So I definitely love their uniforms, or at least, well, I have a big critique. I have a really big deal about their uniforms later on down the road, only because it looks like they're football players minus the leg pads and all that kind of stuff. But like their ships, on the other hand, I absolutely love the ships. I mean, honestly, if there was going to be something like what we would probably visualize like later on down the road for us or something like that, I can vision something like that because it's more compact. It looks like something that would fly through the air, and it looks intimidating. So I definitely I really like their ships. So yeah.
Well, and I think their whole look was meant, obviously, to be intimidating. I find it interesting, though, because like when we see Cardassians, they seem to be the very tall, skinny people. And then they're in these uniforms that like puff them up and make them look larger than they are. And I'm like, no, look at that. That guy's like all skin and bones. And here he's got this big, I just always find that, like, converse that with Klingons where we see, really big, hefty Klingons. And, we sort of see the spectrum. But with Cardassians, they seem to be all the tall, lanky, skinny variety.
In TNG, at least, you see so many Cardassians in DS9, I think, Amy, that's a bit more of a spectrum, and you do see some of the bigger, different shapes and sizes of people. Yeah. But rounder. In TNG, it's pretty much what you're saying. Yeah.
All it's missing is the plastic.
Yeah. I know. I'm just like, there's no way that guy's filling up that uniform. It's just all for show. Well, I think many would argue that this is definitely an O'Brien episode, and we do learn some things about O'Brien and his past because it's revealed that he was a tactical officer on Maxwell's ship, the Rutledge. So it seems to me like tactical officer seems more important than transporter chief. Like, is that a downgrade? Like, did he get demoted? I mean, what's up with that backstory?
So here's how I see it. So with this story, obviously without this story, we wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be able to come up with this little background. But what we have in the military is that, so if someone goes through something like traumatic or something like that, they get reassigned a desk job in a sense. And that's what I think O'Brien got transferred into. Now, obviously, I don't think the writers were thinking of it that way, but going from a traumatic event like
what happened to him on Setlik 3, right?
Thank you. I was thinking of the planet. Like in Setlik 3. And, going through a traumatic event, like he, obviously describes throughout the episode, about war stories and whatnot. Like a transporter chief is like a desk job. I'm pretty sure to a tactical officer or anyone. So...
Well, but even before that, like in Encounter at Farpoint, we see him as the Battle Bridge con officer. So he's going around a little bit to some but yeah, I could see that maybe because you can tell from the story that he tells Darrow in 10 Forward that this is very traumatic. It's the first time he's had to kill anyone in his life, and it just really affected him, and he saw this big massacre. And yeah, I do wonder, like, he was a tactical officer, and maybe it just affected him so much that they were like, you just need to step back for a little bit and do something a little different. Yeah, it's a good point. But like, I almost wanted to see like a flashback of him as a tactical officer, like seeing him doing that, but I'll just have to imagine it. But it's pretty great to think that he has that kind of background.
Yeah. So talking about, I think O'Brien, we definitely get this arc through him, and we suspect that obviously at the beginning, we see that he definitely does not like Cardassians. And then later on in the episode, his iconic line, "It's not you I hate, Cardassia. It's I hate what I become because of you." Like, and I had a question, like, we see the arc and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but like, what is it in O'Brien? Because I don't think we see it on screen where he makes that transition into not hating the Cardassians like he does at the beginning. I'm wondering what is it that you think, is it in his character? Like, what is it that changes that so that he changes, the way he feels?
I actually don't think anything has changed.
Oh.
I think because I've thought about this each time that I have watched the episode. I think he's telling the truth when he says that he doesn't hate Cardassians, but like the hostility that Troy picks up and what Keiko is picking up and what you're seeing as a viewer, I think, is him thinking about that time on Settlek 3 and how difficult it was and how he hates what he became because of that. So I don't think the Cardassians themselves is who he hates. It's just that they remind him so much of a really traumatic experience and what he became because of it. At least that's how I see it. Not that he's changed, but that we get like a further clarification of what's really going on. And then he does, like he says, I like them fine enough, but he doesn't want to go into that traumatic experience until he's forced to.
Right, and I have to agree with you on that one too, Justin. I mean, it's just like any other person that's experienced any kind of trauma. You can't get into a car because of your, maybe you lost someone, or maybe something happened to you that just, scared you to half to death or something like that. And in a sense, this is the same thing. I can relate to this. There was a point in time where I wasn't comfortable around Arabic people, and that took a couple of years to get used to. And this episode hits more home to me, mostly because it's just, and it sucks to even think of it that way. I mean, I'm not a hateful person either, and I'm not a person that wants to think like that. But when in the back of my mind, it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I went into, I can't remember where I went. It was an Arabic restaurant. I can't remember what it was, but I felt so uneasy for some reason. And, I was there with a couple friends, and it's just like I had to get out of there. I don't know what it is. And, like I said, I'm not hateful towards Arabic people or anything like that, but I understand exactly what the writers were trying to do with O'Brien in this scene, because I say the same thing. I don't hate Arabic people. I hate what happened to me over there, and I have no ill towards any of them. So I understand that completely. Like I said, this kind of trauma, it takes years. I mean, it's been what? I went to combat in 2003. So yeah, it's been 15. 15 years. Yeah. So it probably took me at least 10 years to finally get over that completely. And it was a difficult journey to get that out of the back of my mind. Because before I used to just watch my back all the time, and that was no matter where I was. And it's very scary to go through that. It really is. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting is we're talking about what we see in TNG with O'Brien and Cardassians. We might have a somewhat different conversation if we were talking about what happens in DS9. But
yeah.
I think just strictly if you're looking at it at this point in The Wounded, I do believe that that's how he feels. It's not that he doesn't like them, it's that he's been so affected by this experience that any Cardassian reminds him of that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, and so with that said, like at the end of the episode, we see O'Brien become this amazing diplomat when he's talking to Maxwell over on his ship. And, he sort of talks him down. Do we think that that's in O'Brien's character? I mean, we don't really know him as this diplomat, and here he steps up and like, how do you think he was able to do that when we see his backstory, with the hatred and what he's become because of Cardassia, and we see, his trust in Maxwell, and now he's being a diplomat and really talking him down out of a very tense situation.
Yeah, and I don't know if I had thought of it that way before, like, that he becomes a diplomat, because he really is kind of negotiating an end to this tense situation. Mm-hmm. I just wonder, is it because he knows Maxwell so well and they serve together, through life and death situations, and that they connect on this song, which it's kind of like, sometimes I wonder, like, oh, it's great that they're singing this song, but why is it there? But it's like this kind of connection that goes beyond words. It's this real, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like this brother in arms kind of connection that they have. So he's able to kind of negotiate this situation because of that. But I wonder if he didn't know him as well, if it would work that way. And I don't know anywhere else in TNG where we see O'Brien quite like that. But I think it's really nice, and it works well. But yeah.
Yeah, I think when you are serving, especially in battle, like, you do get this bond. I can only think of, like, when I have taught in at-risk schools, and it's like the world is against you. Every student is against you. No one wants to be there. And we've got these teachers that are there for the right reasons and are supporting the kids and loving the kids. And almost like a war zone. I mean, there were fights at school every day and gangs, and like the teachers when I worked with at my last school, like, we are still friends. We're still tight because of that bonding that we had, because we had to go in to the trenches, if you will, to teach these kids each and every day. And that bond, I think, really connects you. And I think we definitely see that. I don't think it could have been anyone else. Obviously not Picard. Maxwell had already written him off as being stuffy and, sitting at his desk too long. So, for O'Brien, I think he was the only one that could have done that and served the purpose.
Absolutely. And, it's to basically move along the line with you on your what you're saying, Amy. It's definitely a different bond. I mean, I remember being in the military too. It's like, we're out drinking, whatever, getting each other out of trouble, and then even going down the field. It's a bond that, you save my life, I save your, sort of thing. And, I'm going to do whatever I can because you did everything you can to help me out there or wherever. And I think anyone can go through that, whether it be like an accident or anything like that. I don't know if the bond's stronger or not, but I mean, I would assume it is, especially if it's a life or death situation for anyone. But like, I mean, having that bond and actually, going through the same exact traumatic events as Maxwell and O'Brien did, for sure. He would have been the only person to talk him down anyway, just short of destroying the entire ship and killing him, because he's got that bond, and sometimes when you're in that dark place and you're in that zone, and the only person that can bring you out is one person, and that one person happens to speak, and then you're there, and it's like, hey, what's going on, And I think that is a very, very strong statement for them to do this, to obviously, being the tactician that he is, that he can get through the shield, which now we know.
Yes.
Now we know we can get through the shield without actually destroying it.
For certain vessels,
right,
apparently.
For certain vessels. I can only imagine that be classified beyond anyone. But like,
and that they fixed it for something like the Enterprise D or Galaxy class.
Right.
Maybe.
So apparently it's not impenetrable. So yeah.
Well, apparently there's even more than that, because I think this is going into Deep Space Nine. So in Trials and Tribulations, I think they end up beaming aboard the Enterprise because it has a cycle and there's like a couple seconds gap where they can.
That's right. So I remember that. Yeah. Yep.
So they've closed it to
the same thing.
Yeah.
The same kind of thing, but it's longer, like apparently in the 23rd century, and then it gets shorter, I guess, with this Nebula class ship, and maybe it's so short that you can't beam through it. But yeah, they did use that later.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a good thing that they used it this way, and I'm glad that they did. This kind of bond that he was able to connect with them and actually talk them down, which is great. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. They sing this song, this minstrel boy song that has all kinds of history going back to the 18th century. I was looking up a little bit, and it's kind of like they connect on that level, and then that's the point at which Maxwell says, "I'm not going to win this one, am I, Chief?" It's like you completely understand what's going on here. You understand my side. You understand where Picard's coming from. And the best thing is just to go along with what you're saying because I trust you completely. You know, he's gone from the point of like, hey, what are you doing here? Holding up a phaser to O'Brien to like, you're right. I just need to accept this. So it's such a fascinating scene. And it's so good and so effective. And it feels like it could happen because of the connection that they have.
Well, let's talk about that. 'Cause, we get to see Maxwell's character, and we get this a great, tremendous arc with what we see on screen with Captain Maxwell. You're right. That scene is so powerful, and it's fine. We get to see this realization. Yeah, he's not going to win this one, and then he makes the comment, "Well, now I need to find my role in peace." What do you think? Do we think that he's going to be successful in finding this new role once we've seen how many years he's been in this revenge, retribution type of mentality?
Are you talking about Maxwell or are you talking about O'Brien?
Maxwell.
No, I don't think so. And obviously obviously we see in the end of the episode that that he doesn't believe. I mean, it's all justified too. I mean, it's all based on what you see and what you interpret versus actually seeing what's going on, like smuggling weapons to the border. In this case, that is when it comes to him coming to grips. I think he are coming to grips to being peaceful. I don't think that he will ever come to that realization. I mean, maybe if you put him on the other side of the frontier or something like that. Funny enough, he was right about the whole entire, the conflict later on down the road, as we find out in DS9. It's just that I don't believe that a person that's been out in a sense, the field or out in the wilderness, or whatever you want to call it, but definitely someone on the front line who has seen that kind of deception and knows those Cardassians that what they do to deceive the Federation and everything that they're trying to do. For sure, I don't think that he'll ever be able to come to grips with making peace with the Cardassians. I mean, he'd have to be either taken off being a captain or do something else like a desk job. There you go. He can do a desk job. But in this case, he's probably going to get prosecuted. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I want to point out there's a follow-up novel that came out a few years ago called Force in Motion. It's a DS9 novel that includes O'Brien, Maxwell, and Nog. And it actually takes place 18 years after this. He's been in prison for 18 years. So for what, at least according to this novel, for what he's done and destroying those ships and killing all of those Cardassians, he goes to prison for a long time.
Huh.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting novel, actually, and
do you know what it's called?
Teams up with O'Brien. It's called Force in Motion.
Force in Motion. Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty good novel, and you get to, but like also it has flashbacks to what happens to him afterward and him trying to adjust and all that. It's actually a really great follow-up. But I would believe that because he's gone against orders, he's gone into Cardassian space, he's destroyed ships without authorization, so it makes sense he would go to prison for me.
Well, and that brings up the question, like, Maxwell is so confident that his actions will be vindicated because he knows what the Cardassians are doing. He knows what they're up to. And you can feel, especially when he's talking with Picard, he doesn't feel that he's being heard. Like, he's sent reports to, Central Command or whatever you want to call it, and he's trying to explain it to Picard, and he's not being heard. So then that's what I think he feels that he needs to go, and he's supposed to be, taking the ship back, and he veers off and goes to this supply ship. Like, he feels that he is right. And like Picard, he's more concerned with Maxwell's actions, just his actions alone, and actually says like what Cardassia does is irrelevant. is Picard right to focus only on Maxwell's actions? Like, is doing the wrong thing for the right reason ever justified?
Well, I mean, I think so. Maxwell is seeing this in terms of these Cardassians are running weapons. We need to expose this. He thinks to avoid a war, but for Picard, he's been charged with making sure there are no violations of the peace treaty so that another war doesn't break out. Right? Like Picard says at the end, like, you know, if I had boarded that ship, we wouldn't be having this pleasant conversation right now, Golmaset, you know? So, and I think Picard, I mean, like, I think we said this before in the character moments. What's interesting is they're both right in a certain sense, right? Maxwell is right about what's going on, and that probably helps later on when there is more conflict with the Cardassians in Deep Space Nine. But Picard is also right because, you know, even if Maxwell is right, is it better for the hostilities to break out now? You know, or is it better to be somewhat prepared for that and have that happen some years hence? So it's like they're both right in their own way, and I could see it both ways. But for Picard, he's being charged with a mission like keep the peace, you know, make sure that Maxwell doesn't start a war. So he's thinking about like right now what needs to happen.
So yeah, and I really wish they would have I mean, to the point whether or not Picard did the right thing or not. I think he did, and I really wish that it probably would have made it a lot stronger had, like, I don't know, the commanding admiral gave him more intel or something like that on what's going on. We've been receiving reports from him about what's going on, that they're being deceptive out there and whatnot. And you know, I get it. You know, Maxwell being having a starship with that kind of firepower, I mean, you kind of have to stop someone from doing that, especially when you're taking on transports that have no weapons, and then especially an adversary that, you know, shoots lasers and really doesn't do much damage, as we saw in the beginning of The Wounded. It's like, okay, you know, it's a bug bite.
Yeah, it does seem like the Cardassians are a little behind the Federation at this point,
right? And then what? Like 2 years later, they're like on par with us when it comes to technology. So, or like in DS9.
Well, I think longer than a couple years.
Well, you know what I mean. I'm just saying, like, in the grand scheme of the seasons, that is. So, but like, yeah, it's you know, you would think that an adversary like the Cardassians, you know, we went through a war and everything, and they would have at least weapons that match us, you know, because like I imagine that we advance that far.
It's a good question, unless they just had so many more ships or something. I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know.
In some ways, it doesn't make sense. But I want to add to what I said before. Like, Maxwell is right that there's something going on, but he definitely has the wrong methods. Like, he shouldn't be destroying these ships and killing hundreds of people.
Oh yeah, totally agree.
You know, with these raids. So he's going about it the wrong way. And I also wonder, like, is there another way he could have gotten attention without destroying ships like this? I don't know. I mean, but it just seems like, okay, I'm gonna prove that there's something going on. Let me invade their space and destroy some ships. I mean, that's just like a bad idea.
Maybe if you like disabled them and then confiscated what was on board and then documented it and then left, and then that would have been a lot more stronger than, oh well, they got a higher power signature to mask what's on their ship and all that kind of stuff. So.
Probably. Yeah, and what I also wonder about is, like, it seems like he's gotten into a state of mind that's very different, because I think he's, you know, had a pretty good record up to this point, but something happened and it's like he snapped a little bit. But he's also been able to convince, you know, others on his ship to go along with it. I kind of wish we would have seen somebody else that's on his ship so we could see what that interaction's like. But he's the only one that we see on the Phoenix, so...
Well, I think it's, interesting lesson that we learn. And I think in this episode, it's definitely clear that no, your actions are not justified, no matter what the Cardassians do. I mean, what Cardassia does is irrelevant. And I have...
You ever think of Locutus when Picard says that?
I know, right? I'm like, well, in this episode, no, the ends do not justify the means, you know, and I think definitely we see in Star Trek it goes back and forth with that.
Yeah.
But I definitely have used that term. What they do is irrelevant when I'm speaking to my students. When they decide to make, you know, poor choices, well, but no. I will deal with them separately. And I think Picard does this great. It's like, no. We're going to talk about your actions because you are responsible for your actions. I'll deal with Cardassia later, sort of what Picard's, philosophy is and how he's handling the situation. And watching that scene, I'm just like, man, I have said that so many times to my students.
And I'm sure every parent could say the same thing.
Exactly, right? We want, excuse me, we want to teach our children, that you're responsible for your actions and to make your actions as clean and pure and as proper as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, Justin, you talked about the mindset of Maxwell. Like, do we think, because we know that his family, his wife and children were killed and at the hands of Cardassia, this raid that happened. And, but it seems like sort of at the beginning, it was sort of pushed off as, no, he's okay. He's fine. He dealt with it. But do we really believe that at the end of the episode? Is this a revenge retribution story?
I tend to think it's both. Like he does seem motivated by exposing what the Cardassians are doing, because he thinks it would be better to do that. But it does seem like there is some motivation, or is being in some way spurred on by the memories of what happened at the hands of Cardassians. Because I think he must think, like, when we last had a war with the Cardassians, my wife and children died, and lots of other people died. I am doing this, even if I have to sacrifice some people now, I am doing this so that other people don't have to go through that, right? So that other people don't have to lose their spouse and their children and all that stuff, right? So I think he's motivated by a mixture of both.
Yeah, I would say that, it's a mixture of both as well. Probably more so the loss of his child. And then, what bothers me about this as well is that why would you put someone that's been traumatically, gotten their wife and child killed, or he had his wife and child killed by Cardassians, and you're patrolling the Cardassian border? That doesn't make sense.
But is that what he was doing before this, or did he break off from what he was doing in order to go into
that's a good point.
Space?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, he went rogue.
Yeah, maybe.
I see.
Yeah.
I don't know if they really talk about where he was before this or what he was doing.
Okay, well then in that case, then for sure, I would assume that it's revenge, because I mean anyone losing their spouse and child, especially at the hands of an as someone that, like, the Cardassians. I mean, come on. I mean, it's a no-brainer on that one. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and when Maxwell is talking to O'Brien toward the end, he seems to think he's like reliving it, and that's still going on, because he says, "What the hell has happened to this war?" And O'Brien's like, "Sir, there is no war. The war is over." And he's still kind of reliving it. And it seemed, we were talking before that O'Brien, whether he likes Cardassians or not, but I think it's really clear that Maxwell doesn't, because he's saying the Cardassians live to make war, and we don't butcher women and children in their homes, and children never got a chance to grow up. So he's painting this picture of all of the Cardassians as living to make war and wanting to, kill people that he loves and cares about. So he's still there in that mindset of that war. And
you know what I just realized, that him, O'Brien, going over to talk to Maxwell, I think that ended it for him. Like, in his mind, like, obviously, he would probably be more violent or maybe more aggressive towards Cardassians. But I think that seeing Maxwell going through that, breaking down, and going through that kind of hatred, and then it destroying him ultimately in the end, and then for him to witness that actually just ended it for him. But like, I don't want to be like that. I have my whole life and career ahead of me. And then, of course, I'm probably thinking about family as well, that I don't want to, have Molly at that time to, repeat that behavior. So I really think that this was very important for him to actually see that, to have closure to what happened on Celsius 3. So.
Yeah, and just maybe a little bit more about that. So when O'Brien and Maxwell are talking, they mention this other guy that they served with, and
Mm-hmm.
and that he died, and it's like, oh, what was that song that he liked? And they start singing the Minstrel Boy, which has traditionally become something that you sing at funerals, or where the melody is at a funeral. So it's like they're finally kind of burying that part of it that they've been living with, and that's why he kind of accepts it after that. I mean, maybe it happens quickly, but that's kind of nice, because it is that kind of thing that's meant to bring closure, because it's used a lot at funerals.
Oh my gosh, I totally love that. Oh,
And I hadn't
that gave me to chills, because I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, and just when I was looking up some history of the song, I mean, it's become something, as I think, especially among Irish Americans, something that is something that's played or sung at a funeral when you're saying goodbye to someone. So yeah, it seems pretty appropriate.
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about a little bit about what we learn about Picard in this episode. We find out that on the Stargazer, he was there to make preliminary overtures to a truce with the Cardassians, but he had a very close escape. So do we think that Picard is affected in his dealings with the Cardassians? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, he's affected, but I think in a different way than Maxwell, because Picard's experience is he was going, I assume, on some kind of diplomatic mission, and he was fired upon and kind of barely escaped. So his experience, I think, is these Cardassians are dangerous, and we don't want to go to war with them again. Like, he has no sense of wanting revenge or anything like that. So I think usually Picard tends to go the diplomatic route anyway, but I think this reinforces it. Like, let's prevent that situation where there are other ships that might be barely escaping the Cardassians or getting destroyed. So I think it affects him that way.
Yeah, and I don't think it affects him too much. So here's the logic I'm going off of. So when you fight with when you fight with a gun, it's not as personal. But when because I mean you can shoot from a distance, and I'm sure that's the same thing with a starship as well. But when you fight hand to hand with a knife, I mean, obviously a knife is a very personal, intimate weapon, because you have to come in close. And I'm thinking so since Picard never really got into that kind of kind of fight with the Cardassians. I mean, yes, he knows that they barely got out of there, and they got fired upon and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. But at the same time, it's a little different when you're fighting ship to ship versus person to person. It's a little bit more traumatic, and it's far more personal than you can. I mean, I'm sure you can only imagine what it's like, but it's very traumatic. That's all I mean, really, that's how I'm seeing is that why Picard isn't really more personal into it like, Maxwell is, that and how Picard can actually see it from, a distant and look at it from all perspectives versus what Maxwell went through, which was, like we said, Celsius 3, they went hand to hand on with the Cardassians there. So,
Yeah, I agree with you, Richard. I think that it doesn't affect Picard as much, obviously, as it does with Maxwell. And we sort of see that when, Maxwell's going away and Picard is refusing to give the exact position to Golmasset. However, he's forced to at the end by the circumstances that Maxwell puts him in. But we can see that Picard, he's just this great diplomat. He's trying to protect the Federation's advantages until his hand is forced. He seems to, be stepped back and is able to see the bigger picture a little bit more clearly with what this peace treaty means and trying to prevent this war by not boarding the ship, by, sharing information and going along with everything. So
I think that Picard does do a good balancing act in trying to be diplomatic, but also trying to make sure that he's doing everything to pursue Maxwell. But there is one thing that happens that I question, because I think they're following, and one of the Cardassian ships gets destroyed by the Phoenix, and then you find out that they've been going warp 4, and Picard's like, increased to warp 9. I'm like, why weren't you going warp 9 the whole time in order to get there as quickly as you can? I don't know. It's one of those things that happens in TNG a couple of times. But overall, I think he's doing well. But I think, like, did that ship get destroyed because he wasn't going warp 9 the whole time?
That's funny because when I was watching, my brother sort of said the same thing. And it's like, they're like, why aren't they going faster? Why are they going so slow? It's not like there's a speed limit in space. And
It's before that 7th season episode with the speed limit.
Oh, is that season 7?
Was it?
That's season 7. Yeah, it's before that.
Oh my, way before that. And so I was telling my brothers, I'm like, yes, there's a speed limit. There's a whole episode about it. But apparently my timeline is switched.
And it's even like, oh, you know, Data, how long until we intercept the Phoenix? It's like, at our present speed of warp 4, 16 hours, 44 minutes. Like, 16 hours? Like, this is happening right now. Anyway, one of those things. But overall, I think he does a really good balancing act, and he does accomplish his mission because he gets Maxwell and takes him into custody, and then he also makes sure to preserve the peace, although, you know, some ships get destroyed. But I think overall he does a good job of balancing. That's a really tough thing to balance, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and talking about that balancing act, I love the scene when Glentil is brought to the bridge because his hand's been caught in the cookie jar, right?
Yeah.
And Golmasset asked to speak to Picard privately in his ready room. And they have this interchange that's like, Picard says, we must not allow one man to undermine the purpose of lasting peace. And that idea, when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, we've totally seen this scene before. If you remember in Loud as a Whisper, when the two facets come to meet for the first time and then they kill Riva, the mediator, the deaf mediator, if you remember, listeners. And I'm like, that was the exact terminology. Like, we must not allow individuals or groups of people to undermine these peace talks. Like, this whole idea that, you know, we can't allow just one facet, one group, one individual to upset this progression that takes so much to get to. You know, I just found that similarity.
It's great. And it makes you wonder, like, did Picard learn that from Riva, or did they have the same, like, diplomatic teacher or something?
He learned it, I mean, yes.
You think he learned it from Riva in that episode? Okay.
So I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about sort of the theme of this episode, which is racism, that we see. And I think we see some tremendous arcs with O'Brien and with Maxwell. So if you will indulge me, I think we start at the beginning of the episode when we hear language of others and those people. Like, that type of language is used to distance ourselves from the Cardassians in this place. Like, Maxwell even says, we're not the same. Like, there's... You know, racism starts with having these differences that you are not like me, we are different. And I think in the turbo lift where we see Darrow, he's trying to find some common ground. Oh, can you help us with this? And O'Brien totally shuts him down. If my commander says this, then I will do it. But who I choose to spend my free time with is my business. Like, he's not even having any bit to do with the Cardassians. And it's sort of at that point, I think it's interesting that the writers, at least for me, I felt sorry for this Cardassian. Like, because he was reaching out with this olive branch and was just completely shut down. Did you guys feel sorry for the Cardassians at that point?
I think... So again, we had talked about there's a spectrum, right? And Darrow seems to be the most reasonable or sympathetic. I mean, I think, like... The strange thing is, in some ways, for a long time to come, he's maybe the most sympathetic Cardassian that we see. And I think it is really something, because I think they intended it to be, you know, just like an alien of the week, but they're putting a lot into it at that point in order to make you feel sympathetic. And I did feel sympathetic to them a lot of the time, which was unusual. And maybe that was because you were supposed to think of them as an ally. But yeah, I do feel some sympathy for him and trying to reach out. And he says in 10 Forward that he's kind of, you know, tired of what's going on and wants to to move on. Like through and through, he seems like somebody you can relate to, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I feel sorry for him too as well. I mean, it's difficult to have something like that. I mean, when you're already branded as the enemy, and you're trying to do your best. I mean, there's obviously a few people out there that are like willing to give that olive branch. What be like like in this kind of situation where there's three of them, obviously three different types of people that represents the Cardassians, and having that one person to bring out that olive branch to basically tear down the wall of, hey, we used to be enemies, but I mean, and it's hard. It really is. It's really hard to break down those walls, and I mean, I feel kind of sorry for that kind of person, but at the same time, it's commendable for that one Cardassian to actually have the nerve and, in a sense, have the balls to friggin' come across the table and basically jump over that wall and be like, hey, I'm here as a friend. I have no ill will to you, and it's very commendable. I absolutely like that. I really
Although
do.
at the same time, in the turbolift, Darrow is kind of asking for some insight into the transporter technology, so it makes you wonder, like, is he just trying to take some stuff or take some advantage? But I mean, you could also see it in terms of, they're allies at this point, and maybe they should share some information as part of their alliance. But
Absolutely, yeah. And it could be very well just be curiosity. I mean, it very well could be. I mean, at the same time, you got to be on your toes, especially when you're dealing with that kind of technology too.
Well, and then later, I think it's interesting in this arc that we see, we're going to stand off, not do. And then O'Brien and Keiko, they're sharing dinner. And I think this stage of this arc, like Miles is recognizing the logic of not being racist, because he's saying, well, there were some people in the room who don't like them, but the fighting is over. Why should I feel any hostility? Like, I feel fine. And then later he says, I like them fine, but watch your back around those people. Like, I think he's now at this stage where he's seeing the logic of it, but I don't think that he's really identifying his feelings and his emotions regarding the Cardassians. Like, now it's just more cerebral, like, well, the fighting's over. No one should have any hatred, but not identifying it with himself.
Sort of like subconsciously, he's not convinced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
so are you saying, like, during the episode he's trying to convince himself how he should feel about them, or?
Well, I think how I read it, I don't even think that he believes that he is being racist. And so in his mind, it's just sort of this logical, well, the war's over. People shouldn't have any hostility. I feel fine about it, but he's not identifying with his actual feelings and emotions. And like, we get that realization, I think, in 10 Forward. And it's, again, this great scene that O'Brien has where he's describing his first kill and how that changes him. And I think it's at this point later on in the episode where he is really feeling the impact that he's been carrying this racism, if you will, against Cardassia for so long that it took, I mean, I don't know which act it was in, but it took all that time for him to actually, identify his feelings towards the Cardassians.
Yeah, but I think based on how I felt about it and the way I was seeing it before, I don't think he really dislikes them. I don't think he has racist feelings toward them. He is just reminded of the situation that he was in and manifests it in terms of, I think, some hostility and unfriendliness toward them. But I don't know if I'd go, I could be wrong, but I don't know if I'd go as far to characterize it that he has some racist feelings toward the Cardassians. Again, at least in TNG, or at least in this episode that we see.
See, I don't see. So just like what you said in the beginning of the episode, Amy, it's like, or not episode, this segment, I should say. You were talking about, like, others and those and distance themselves. And, it's like, I really think that, I mean, obviously the racist terms for the Cardassians are what? Cardies and spoonheads? Is that right? Cardies and Spoonheads.
Yeah, well, and the reason that I was saying, at least in TNG, is you do hear O'Brien calling them Cardis in DS9, so I
Yeah,
think he
I
has
mean,
some of
whether
that
that's
there.
meant, I mean, obviously it's meant to be degrading and
Yeah.
distance themselves, which, any war, it's the same thing. I'm sure they called us something over there in Iraq, and same thing with us in Vietnam. It's just, in order, I don't see it. I mean, maybe some people do, but I don't see it as a form of racism, and the reason why is because it's not like you said, it's a great line on, it's not you, it's what I did. And to differentiate your emotions of what happened over there versus what's going on now, like in peacetime or something like that, you have to separate the two. I mean, like, it's kind of hard to describe, but like, I'm trying to remember my sociologist class, a sociology class that I did about this.
But I think when
Yeah.
it gets into the name calling part of it for a certain group of people, you usually do that because you want to kind of delineate them as less than you. At least that's how I usually see it.
Okay, no, and I agree. No, I agree. No, I agree with you. No, I totally agree with you on that one. Because okay, so I'm just gonna dip into what I know. So,
Okay.
when I was over there, we called those who fired on us, and I hope to God this is acceptable for me to say, but we called them Hajis, and those were the ones that shot at us. And then the civilians that we used to call, like anyone else outside of that, we call Iraqis. And it was just to differentiate the difference between the two: those who wanted to kill us and those who wanted to help us out. And usually, you couldn't differentiate the difference between the two sometimes. I mean, because sometimes there were children, and sometimes there were women, and most of the time there were men. But like, in this case, I mean, I saw I mean, believe you me, when I was out there, I didn't want to be like my Vietnam friends and called them like Charlie. I mean, called everyone Charlie. I mean, it was just not. I didn't think it was appropriate. So, but like when we're out there in the field, I mean, in order to identify those people that were trying to kill us, that is not saying that those people, we had to call them by a certain name, but yeah. I mean, I personally don't think it's racism. I don't. It's just a way to identify. That's how I see it. So, yeah.
Well, I think in this episode, like when Maxwell and O'Brien, they're treating the entire Cardassia based off of the one event. Like, and then Miles, I think, is denying his own actions as being racist. I think that arc that we see is a lesson to us. Like people, I think a lot of time looking at our country, like I would suspect that many people believe that they aren't racist because they haven't identified, and they will give all these logical reasons. Oh, I'm not racist because, and they have this logic to it, but they haven't identified with it.
And sometimes they'll give you a reason like, well, I like this one person that's part of that group, so I can't be
Right.
racist.
Yeah, and so
it's a tough topic, I think, to talk about, a pretty
It
charged
is.
topic.
And I think this episode really does a good job in bringing it up. Like when I was watching it, it's like throughout the episode, we hear this phrase, lasting peace. So even though that they've signed this peace treaty, doesn't mean everyone's going to be all buddy-buddy with each other. And so I asked the question, like, how do we end racism in our society? Like in America, like slavery's over or whatever other thing, like if it comes down from the top down, is it going to be successful? And I sort of look at this episode as sort of a lower decks. Like we've got Miles and these, Glentilla, like those are the people that we're seeing. Even Picard and Maxwell, they're just captains. They're not the big wigs of the Federation. So it sort of, to me, seems like a grassroots, like we have to change ourselves individually And it just can't come top down. Oh, you're going to be friends. You're not going to be racist anymore. It can't come from the top down.
Boy, I mean, that would be a really long conversation if you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, that's a
about
really
that.
long.
How can we end racism in our world? Do you have 5
Well,
hours to talk about that?
I think it starts. My point being is, I think it starts with the individual. You know, I think it
there's a lot of
starts
truth to
with
that.
Miles. I think it starts with, you know, not only just looking at the logical part of it, but actually getting to the emotions. Like, why do I have these negative feelings? And, you know, I was raised this way, or blah, blah, blah. And coming to the terms where it's like, we need to treat others better.
But that's on the assumption that everyone's logical, or has reasoning, or is chemically balanced, or is has never received these kind of traumatic events. Quite honestly, I don't think racism will ever end. And the reason why I'm saying that is because something like World War III, ending almost 3/4 of the population and bringing everyone together to the near brink of annihilation, that's what will end it. Not
so the Star Trek future that starts with wiping out a lot of people and then gets better.
There you go.
Well, I hope
that's how
not
I
our
think
path.
it would work. But and having the
Don't advocate that.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Like, I'm not saying that it should happen. I'm just saying. I think. I mean. Okay,
You're saying that there are things that are so ingrained there would mean
exactly, and it's not. Slate. It's not like. I mean, I'm not. I mean, that's assuming. I mean, assuming everyone's logical. Yes, I can understand that would happen. But then again, there are people out there that are, you know, obviously.
But even in Star Trek, we see Vulcans who are logical, and you could say are being racist.
Exactly, exactly, and it's the same thing. I mean, it's just. I mean, I honestly. I mean, so long as one person exists. With those kind of feelings, it will always spread, and you know there are people that are humble, or I'm not humble, that people that are are sheep and will go and flock to that person, whether they, you know, just like in this if they go through a traumatic event and they all happen to have the same views, I mean, well, shoot, there you go. It's going to spread even further. I mean, the more traumatic events happen and they become more friends and deeper friends and have this kind of stuff happen to them. So
yeah, I think being logical isn't enough. I think we have to deal with our emotions and really face, like we see Miles do as a good example, you know, and sort of see what Maxwell has to face. You know, again, this example of dealing with the emotions on an individual, on a personal level, and not just pushing it off and saying, oh, well, it's logical not to. Like it. I think real change in the grassroots, like it has to be personal and it has to start with every individual. And it's sad because you're right. I don't see that every person is going to do that. And like you're saying, this World War III Armageddon type of philosophy, like that's going to put us all in the same survival category where now that's going to bond us because we need to survive.
A common struggle, you know? For sure.
Yeah, but okay. So I think the root of it, though, is that it's something that's learned. Like when someone's born or when they're, you know, a very small child, they don't really, as far as I've seen, like exhibit racist feelings. It's something that they learn either from their parents or their friends or something they see on TV or whatever, right?
And society.
So, yeah. So I think, you know, the solution involves, I don't know, again, it's like a huge topic, but, you know, some kind of like education about that so that people know what they're saying and how it affects other people and how their attitudes affect people, and then passing that on to their kids and friends and mentors and all of that. So it may be something that, yeah, go ahead.
Well, like I was saying, you know, you have one person that exists from that group, it still will always be there. That's why I believe
there's
that
billions of us. It's hard to like eliminate anything.
Well,
really.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You can at least try to reduce it.
The odds of actually destroy it completely is astronomical. I mean, it cannot. It's just. I mean, like I was saying, you know, an actual, a common problem that not common problem. What did I say beforehand? Great, I'm blanking out. Anyway, but like it's just like they have to have a common struggle. There we go. To band everyone. I mean, like maybe an invader from another world, and that we defeat them or something like that, like ID4.
But even
like
that is not necessarily enough, because there are people from different groups that have banded together and become allies, like in a war, like what happened with the Soviet Union and the U.S. But that didn't mean that they were going to be all friendly toward each other and love each other after
But
that.
a good portion still hate us too. So
right. So I mean, I think you're making a point that that's something you could never eliminate, and that could be right. But I think there are a lot of things we could do to reduce it significantly, because it can be very harmful.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could definitely reduce it. I mean, absolutely. I'm not saying that it can't be to a level where it's almost near non-existent. But I'm just saying, like, it can never truly go away. That I wish that it would, because it's not good for anyone. I mean, like you said, it's a learned behavior, and if we just get rid of it, I mean, that's great. But I mean, that's wishful thinking, unfortunately. I mean, that would have to take like 600 years or something like that for that to get to that point. I mean, to actually dilute it to the point where it's almost gone.
Well, and I think the first step is to change yourself.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It always starts with you.
Yeah.
Well, not you, but you know what I mean.
Yes. Well, there was some random thoughts. Just real quick, some highlights.
Yeah, you haven't mentioned Troy yet. What's with that?
I know, right?
Well, so to all those people that keep saying, we don't see Troy do anything, she's not a real counselor. Okay, this episode highlights Troy and her profession. I love it. At the beginning, Troy's at her best. We don't really see her, but she's doing real counseling and doing her job that she's supposed to be doing. So Picard has instructed her to stay close to the crew and monitor their behavior during this mission, during this terse time with the Cardassians. Like, that is why we have a counselor on board. Like, it's such a great Troy moment. Now, would I have liked to see her actually doing her job, doing the counseling? Absolutely. That's not what the episode is about. But just wanted to point out, Troy is doing her job very valiantly, and I love it.
Yeah, we don't see anyone else on the ship make trouble for them, so she must be doing a great job.
Exactly.
I love, Amy, that you're just imagining all the things that she's doing for that assignment.
And then one other thing, like Miles and Keiko relationship, is this an arranged marriage? Like, how does he
arranged
not
by Data,
know
apparently,
about her culture? Like, he doesn't know what she eats. She doesn't know what he eats.
Oh, you don't eat muffins? And it's like, I don't think that's much part of her culture unless something's changed in a few hundred years.
Well, and it's like, didn't they go on dates? Didn't they ever go to dinner? Like, I don't know. It just seems so weird that they were so confounded. Like, ooh, you eat that? What am I eating? I don't know.
Maybe it was arranged marriage. I don't know.
Well, Data introduced them. I don't know.
I mean, you would think that even if it, I mean, yeah, like you said, dating wise and all that kind of stuff, when you can replicate anything, practically anything that you want to eat or any style or whatever, you would think that they would at least know what their favorites are.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, who knows? So we see them in the episode before this, and in Data's day where they're getting married. I don't know. Maybe they've only known each other for a week, and they're like, "This is great. I don't even have to know what you eat. We can get married."
Maybe you should take a couple notes from Geordie's and just take it from the personal file or something like that.
There you go. Anyways, those were just some random thoughts I had.
Wow.
All right, guys. Well, we've been talking for quite a while. Why don't you tell me, Richard, your final thoughts on The Wounded?
I absolutely love this episode. It's one of my favorites. Like I said, as I mentioned before, that when this episode came about was right before Desert Storm was just about to commence. But like it definitely tells a story that that we all should be thinking about what we do, what we say to other people, especially when what we consider as racist or whatnot. Versus using tags like us versus them sort of thing. And For sure, just we need to watch out for that. And then also, just on a personal note, as a veteran also with who's also had PTSD as well, make sure that you make sure if you have a veteran or know a veteran or family member that's a veteran that not they don't always want to talk to you. They do. They just don't know how. So if you have anyone that's been through that kind of traumatic behavior, and it's not just a veteran, it's anyone that's been through any kind of traumatic behavior, for sure. Sometimes most of the time they do want to talk, they just don't know how. So reach out.
Yeah, I mean, this has always been one of my favorite episodes, and I knew that there would be a lot to talk about. I mean, honestly, when I was looking at the outline for things we had added, I thought we'd be going for a good 2 or 3 hours, so thank you for focusing the discussion, Amy.
Thank you.
But there's a lot that you can get into that's really interesting. I mean, the Cardassians, the introduction of the Cardassians, I don't think we knew it at the time, but extremely important because it's part of the foundation of Deep Space Nine and a lot of the rest of the 24th century Star Trek. I think they are a pretty interesting species, even from what you learn here and then learning about that past conflict that you want to know more about, and that they're allies and they're going after, this human commanded Federation starship. It's just kind of, it's a really fascinating exploration of the aftermath of a conflict, and also kind of the tension that can happen between recent allies and trying to see who's getting the advantage and all of that. I mean, I feel like there's so many layers we didn't even get to talk about. I mean, even within this 45-minute episode, when you peel it back more and more and watch it more and more, there's just so much there. And I'll be really interested to see the feedback that listeners have on the Babel conference, if there are things we missed or what they think about some of these topics, some of which are kind of charged topics. So I think we got into some really great discussions, and I'm so glad that we talked about this episode today.
Yeah, I too am so happy to have these discussions. I think we got into a lot of really good conversations. And Richard, I thank you for you being brave and adding your thoughts and your perspective, something that I don't have. And so really appreciate you sharing with us. I love the arcs that we see with O'Brien, and I love the arc that we get to see with Maxwell and how that changes within just, like you said, a 45-minute episode in The Wounded. I think there's so many good topics that we just brushed on lightly. I would have loved to have seen more Cardassians in TNG, and I think this is just evident as to why, because they are very complex. There's history there, and I really do enjoy this episode. Well, it's been fun talking about The Wounded. But that isn't the only thing we've been talking about here on the network. Here's what you might have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm. To the journey!
You really did reorient my thinking about the mess hall. Now I need to rewatch every scene with the mess hall and try to visualize Neelix's kitchen as the captain's dining room. I just assumed that when she said, this used to be my private dining room, that she meant the whole mess hall, like the entire room that they're in.
That would be gigantic.
How have I watched Voyager for what is now 23 years and not realized this?
Warp 5.
Gerard, why are you laughing at Gerard?
Just miss. It sounds like, an obnoxious nickname for like a rap star or something. I don't.
See, I'm picturing he's like on Kronos, he's like the representative for Targ Subway.
You see, that's where I would have went with it. Not obnoxious rapper, but guy who lost lots of weight.
Literary Treks.
To me, and I kind of thought this more as we got further into the book, it really felt like a narrative computer game almost, where you find all these clues and you visit these rooms and then you have to visit the rooms again and all that. And we'll get into the main plot of what they do later in the book. But yeah, this setup, I love the mystery. I'm really enjoying what's going on, what happened here.
Earl Grey.
disagree that Nemesis is the worst of the TNG movies. I would put Insurrection and Generations at the bottom, way before Nemesis. Like, there's times when I actually prefer Nemesis over First Contact. You can send me the hate mail later. I love...
Stunned silence follows.
I love Nemesis. I think there is so much good in it. There's so many good themes, and the action and the philosophy and the characters, and I really do love everything about Nemesis just as much as I love everything about First Contact.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they're published. And please leave us a star rating and written review. That helps others to find the show.
If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up.
If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Earl Grey. That will come right to us, and we might read your email on the show. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. So, Amy, where can people contact you when you're not humming the tune to the song The Minstrel Boy?
Well, you can find me here on the network. I host The Edge with Patrick Devlin. That's our show about Star Trek Discovery. You can find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, but my favorite place is right there in the Babel Conference. Richard, where can people contact you when you're not pursuing Captain Maxwell in Cardassian space?
He's mine. Well, you guys can find me on Facebook as well. I pop in here and there on the Babel Conference. And I am also on Twitter. My handle is xransom. So, Justin, where can people contact you when you're not cosplaying as Gul Macet?
You would make a great Gul Macet. Now I want to see it.
You got to have the platform shoes.
Well, so I've got this goatee,
helmet.
And he has this weird facial hair that goes up the side. I'd have to work on that. I'd need to work on the headgear. I'd need to find like a brown leather sofa that I can, carve up to use for the padding, because it has to be accurate to that Cardassian look and not another. So
no kidding,
I'm going to have to think about that a lot. But when I'm not doing that, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek. Currently and still tweeting out my Season 5 rewatch of The Next Generation. I'm getting there. And you can also find me hanging around the Babel Conference on Facebook. If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. Available through our special patrons website, The Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM.
We'd like to take this opportunity to recognize our current associate producers, Norma Lau, Justin Ozer, Michael Huter, and Thomas Appel. Thank you for supporting Trek FM and Earl Grey.
So join us next time for another cup of Earl Grey.
Things are only impossible until they're not.
Today is a good day to die!
Great joy and gratitude.